but we'll hold the Q&A until the end of the presentation. And we'll remind you at that time, but during the question and answer time, you can click raise hand under your reactions button. You can raise hand, and then again, please be mindful when you do unmute of background noise. Next slide. So with that, I want to introduce our supervisor, Luis Alejo, who is chair of the Monterey County Board of Supervisors, to do a welcome and introduction. Thank you, Supervisor, for being here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beretti. Everyone, I am Supervisor Luis Alejo. I'm very proud to serve as this year's chair of the Board of Supervisors. And I just wanted to come here and make some welcome remarks, but to come here in person also just to thank you for joining this important meeting on updating our housing element for Monterey County, something that happens every 8 years to ensure that we are better meeting the housing needs of everyone in our communities all across our county. We also need to have a compliant plan so we can be able to draw down those state and federal dollars that in the end really benefit our families, our businesses, our communities. But we also know that housing and homelessness are some of the greatest challenges of our time. But our Board of Supervisors has been really trying to keep these issues among our top priorities. And we also recognize that housing is imperative to having a good quality of life right here in Monterey County. But we also recognize that we have a lot of work to do. And we know that it's critical to have input from our residents in this process. And that starts from these planning documents like the housing element to also when we actually have projects that come before the supervisors looking for approvals. And I want to really thank our housing and community development staff who are really looking out for us and getting this work done. We really have a good professional team here in Monterey County, but these are all important meetings and part of the process for us to keep advancing our housing goals in our county that I think everybody can really appreciate. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Ms. Beretti. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Supervisor. So just introducing our team today. So on the County of Monterey, our Housing and Community Development, again, I'm Melanie Beretti. We're also joined by Craig Spencer, who's our Chief of Planning and Interim Director for Housing and Community Development. Jamie Guthrie, who's our Senior Planner, who is also on the team advancing our housing element. And then I also want to introduce Edgar Sanchez. We actually accidentally omitted him from this introduction, but he's an assistant planner on our team with the housing element. And then we're also going to hear we'll be joined by our Harrison Associates, our consultant team, Hita Mosesman, Vice President of Community and Development with Harrison Associates, and Kelly Morgan, who's our project manager on this project. Next slide. So before I hand the presentation over, what I wanted to do is just give an overview of what our housing element is. So this housing element for the County of Monterey, this covers the unincorporated counties, the unincorporated areas of the county. So those areas that are outside of the city limits within Monterey County. And our housing element is the primary planning document that implements the county's vision and plan to meet the housing needs of county residents of all income levels. So what does that really mean? It means that our housing element needs to, one, provide new housing in places where our residents, our community, work and where it's not affordable to live. It also means we need to create opportunities and we need to make needed improvements in our lower resource communities to improve the opportunities in those communities. So then we need to outline in the plan the details of how we will make the types and densities of housing feasible at the locations where they're needed. And so this detail will be the programs and the policies that are included in our housing element. And of course, we need to do all of this in a way that meets the state mandates and can be certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Next slide. So an update to the housing element is required by law every 8 years, and it provides an important opportunity to update our housing element according to state housing laws, as well as to maintain the county's eligibility to receive state housing funding. So this update is an opportunity for us as a community to look at what we've done well and where our policies and programs are lacking. And then it allows us to really lay out our plan for how the county will facilitate housing that meets the needs and demands of our residents and our employers over the next 8 years. And this 6-element housing element update will cover 2023 through 2031. So this 6-cycle element will really, it'll need to be presenting with a broad range of programs and policies to help facilitate housing and the associated public infrastructure that we need to facilitate that housing. And we're really looking to you, the community, the residents, to help us to be proactive and creative with our plan. So just a couple of things to put out there. A successful plan, it's going to need to allow for building densities that accommodate a reasonable range of housing at all income levels. It's going to need to allow some housing in certain circumstances by right. So looking for opportunities to reduce where there's discretionary regulations and burden that we can streamline. We'll need to identify constraints and ways that we facilitate those infrastructure improvements that are supportive of housing and create opportunities in those communities lacking historic investment. We'll have to look at our permit processes, at our impact fees, and look at ways to streamline and reduce those processes to help facilitate the housing. We'll need to improve accessory dwelling unit regulations. We'll have to look at possibly at more redevelopment sites that are already developed or underutilized. Water. We're really going to need to look at water. Water should not be a key constraint to housing, which is a dire need in our county. And so we really will need policies and programs to move the needle to get our water supply where it needs to be in support of housing. And we need a jobs housing balance. So we need to really locate housing where the jobs are, including taking a look at allowing employee housing on employment generating land uses. So there's going to be a lot in there, and we really want to look forward to hearing from you on ways in which we can best facilitate housing. So now I'd like to pass this over to Hita with Harrison Associates, and she can walk us through where the county is and where we're going next. Thanks, Hita.
Thanks, Melanie. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy that you all could join. Again, my name is Hita Mosesman. I'm the Vice President of Community Development and Housing with Harrison Associates. We are the county's consultant in the preparation of the housing element. We are currently working on the draft housing element, and we've done quite a bit of data research and analysis, and wanted to provide some data points to you to start out the presentation this evening. The first is on housing cost burden. And what that really means is what percentage of a person's income are they spending on housing? And the definition of housing cost burden, at least locally here in California, is any household that spends over 30% of their gross income on their housing. So just to kind of provide some context there. The data that we've looked at indicates that wages, salaries, and incomes have grown at a slower pace than rent and home prices over the last 7 to 8 years. And that's not just in Monterey County, that's really across the state of California. But in Monterey County specifically, the data that we looked at indicates that rents have increased 65% in the last 8 years. Home prices have increased 93% during that time period. However, median income in Monterey County has only increased by 31%. So you can see that disparity between how fast wages are growing versus housing costs. As I said, housing cost burden is defined as a household that spends over 30% of the gross income on housing. The data indicates, and this is census data, indicates that 33% of households in the county are cost burdened. And of that number, 45% are severely cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So setting the stage for what does affordability look like in Monterey County, and these data points provide some insight on that. And next slide, please. The housing element has a new requirement for this 6th cycle. as Melanie had described. And that is a section called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. And so what that looks like, what that looks at are fair housing considerations with regard to how housing is planned in communities. So every city and county in the state of California has to prepare a housing element, and every city and county in California has to have a section dedicated to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So the housing element must demonstrate that it's promoting fair housing and development of housing in high resource areas, areas with economic opportunities, jobs, and upward mobility. And there needs to be equity in the resource areas and near development near city centers, again, where jobs are located, where services and amenities that people need are located. And the law, the housing element law in California, does encourage that sites be sprinkled throughout the community, not concentrated in just one or two areas, but to be throughout the community to provide housing in all areas. And next slide, please. So with regard to opportunities, the state of California actually maps what they call opportunity areas for, as I said, the entire state by census tracts. And these opportunity areas look at things like educational opportunities, jobs, where incomes are higher, where areas of higher educational attainment are located. So you can see on this map here, the dark green area represents what's called the highest resource area, meaning all the metrics about jobs, economic opportunities, education, they're all very high in those green areas, as opposed to the area that looks sort of orange, which is considered a low resource area, meaning that there's not as much of that opportunity located in those areas. So these opportunity areas are a focus when we're looking at where the housing should be planned in the county. Close to amenities, meaning schools, shops, healthcare, housing that should be affordable, and even in areas where it's not currently affordable, but maybe planning for affordable housing in areas that are more affluent. And then, as I said before, in close proximity to jobs and educational opportunities as well. So this is an important consideration on how we looked at where the physical location of housing is going to be planned over the next 8 years. And next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Morgan, who's also with Harrison Associates. She's a project manager, to do some polling questions and also to give some information on the community survey.
Thanks, Hita, and thank you everybody for joining today. So, before we continue, we did want to take a moment to poll the audience on what housing type you best identify with currently. So with that, in a moment, you'll see a polling window appear, but in the event it doesn't, or if you close the poll window by mistake, please click on the polling button to open the window. And once you do see the window open, please select the answer that you want to give and then click submit. Once you answer, the polling option will disappear from your screen. And so with that, our first polling question is, which applies to you? I rent my housing unit in unincorporated Monterey County. I own my housing unit in unincorporated Monterey County. I own rental property in unincorporated Monterey County, or other. And we'll give everyone a few moments to go ahead and select their answers. Okay, and it looks like we have a pretty good amount of folks identifying with either owning a housing unit in unincorporated Monterey County or identifying with the other category. And so with that, I wanted to pass it back over to Hita briefly to go ahead and go over the 6th cycle regional housing needs assessment for the unincorporated County of Monterey.
And Hita, if I can just step in really quickly before you do that. So for everyone who's in attendance, there's a lot of questions going into chat. But staff, we're not able to move those questions over to the Q&A. So we ask if you've put a question in chat, and if you have questions, if you can go to the Q&A button, that allows us to track those questions and respond more readily in a way that's more organized. So if you can please not use the chat for questions and instead use the Q&A, it'll really help us. That being said, we'll definitely respond to everything that we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. So we wanted to review with everyone in attendance tonight something called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. And really what this basically means is the allocation of housing units the county received that they must plan for over the next 8 years. This number originates with the state of California, who then provides a large number of units to the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. And then the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments then allocates a certain number to each city and then the County of Monterey to plan for. So this isn't a number that the county selected on its own. This came from first the state and then sort of the regional entity. And so the housing allocation number that the county received is 3,326 units. This slide has a lot of numbers on it. I'm going to walk you through what all of this means. And these units are in different income categories. So it's not just 3,326 units. We're done, and it doesn't matter, what income category they're in. They're actually in very specific income categories. So of the 3,300, I'll call it, 1,070, if you look at the RHNA column, which is in the center of the table, there are 1,070 extremely low, very low income units assigned. And this is extremely low and very low. What that means is households that fall into 50% of the area median income or average income in the county or below. And in Monterey County, 50% of median income is $56,850 or below. So if there's a household that's 4 people and their income is about $57,000 a year, they would be in the extremely low, very low income category. For the low income category, that's households that are 50 to 80% of the median income. So this is $57,000 to $91,000 in income per year. There are 700 units allocated. For moderate income, which is 80 to 120% of area median income, 91,000 to about 108,000 per year, 420 units. And then there's what's called above moderate, which is what most people consider market rate housing. This would be above 120% of the area median income. So households above 108,000 per year in income, 1,136 units. So that gives us the grand total of 3,326 units. And you can see that pretty much a third are allocated to extremely low and very low, a third to above moderate, and then a third to both low and moderate combined. So really spread out over different income categories. The State Department of Housing and Community Development requires jurisdictions, cities and counties, to apply a buffer to their RHNA number. And the buffer that was used is 20%. So if we were to add on an additional 20% to the RHNA of 3,326, that would get us to a number of 3,764 total, with the same types of percentages applied to the different income categories. Still a third at extremely low, very low, a third at above moderate, and a third at low and moderate combined. We upped that to a recommended buffer that exceeds over 20%, because it's possible that the state, when they review the county's housing element, and the state must certify it and find it legally compliant, they may request that we remove a site or two. And so we want to have a very healthy buffer to make sure that if there are certain sites that are not accepted by HCD, that we've still met the RENA with an adequate buffer. So we went above and beyond the 20% buffer, and we've planned for 5,121 units total, and again, distributed throughout the different income categories. And next slide.
Great, and I will pick it back up from here. So thank you, Gita, for that. So as part of the housing element update, the county is engaged in a number of outreach activities. Community engagement is a huge portion of this housing element update process. And so with that, the county has engaged with activities that have allowed community members to learn more about the housing element update process and how they can engage with the process. So to date, the county has held an initial community workshop. So that is a workshop prior to the one that you're currently attending. The county has also held community pop-ups and set up housing element update information displays at libraries throughout the county. They released an online survey, and they have also held a number of focused stakeholder meetings. And so just delving into these activities a little bit more, focusing on the first community workshop that was held in late January and had about 70 folks attend. In addition to that, community pop-ups were held in communities across the county, along with the installation of informational displays in libraries located in communities throughout the county. And these activities had a great turnout. They provided the county with some initial feedback from community members. Certain feedback included affordability and housing stock being key issues of concern for communities throughout the county, along with the desire to see higher density and a variety of housing types offered. So next, looking at the housing survey, that was open from January 16th through February 20th of this year. And there was a response count of 532 responses. And so as you can see, there were responses received all throughout the county from a number of different areas and communities within the county. Roughly 86% came from folks who live within unincorporated County of Monterey. 13% came from folks who live within a city in the county, and 1% came from folks who identify with not living within the county. And so key findings from the survey identified that respondents first identified apartment rentals and employee housing as the top two types of housing of most need. Respondents also felt that groups experiencing the highest need for housing were the unhoused, single-parent female-headed households, and low-income agricultural workers. 16% of respondents felt that they've experienced housing discrimination based on income source, race, and family size. Respondents also felt that fair housing services should be enhanced to address issues like affordability, accessibility, and access to information. And then you can also see that respondents felt in an effort to better support opportunities for more housing, there should be more affordable housing units built throughout the county, improved infrastructure, transit, and services to underserved communities, and more outreach to underserved groups about new and existing affordable housing. And so with that, we would like to go ahead and poll the audience again to see if you agree with the survey findings. So when you do see that poll window open, please either choose yes or no as to if you agree with the survey findings. For those of you who choose no, please comment below why in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so. Or you will see an email on the next slide, which you can also go ahead and respond to at a later time, indicating why you don't agree with the findings. And we'll give folks a few minutes to provide some comments in the chat, as well as take down the email address that is provided on the slide to respond at a later time. And just to also reiterate too, we will be answering questions again at the end of the presentation, so feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A and we will be answering those at the end. And we will go ahead and move along. And so moving into looking at the focused stakeholder meetings, The county met with a number of groups who were representative of those involved in housing development, and that ranged from groups from affordable housing developers and advocacy groups to renters. So as you can see, there were a few key themes that did pop up. Some of those key takeaways were the imbalance between available affordable housing compared to the number of those who need it, the need to have housing built in close proximity to amenities, creating a variety of housing types to serve all types of families, and then streamlining affordable housing information for easy accessibility. And so we do want to wrap up the polling portion of the presentation with 2 more questions. So definitely keep an eye out for that polling window to pop open again, and feel free to respond accordingly. So the first question is, are you satisfied with your current housing situation? And please answer yes or no. We'll give it a few moments for folks to go ahead and get their responses in. Great, and it does show a majority are identifying as yes. And the last polling question is, what do you feel are the top 2 barriers to housing in your community? You will see a option list, so please select the top 2 from the following options. Not enough housing for sale, not enough housing for rent, housing is not affordable, housing size does not meet my family needs, housing conditions are poor, lack of water infrastructure, housing is not located in the right places, or other. And again, we'll give folks a few minutes to go ahead and identify their options. Okay, and it looks like with most of you having responded, not enough housing for rent and housing is not affordable tend to be kind of the 2 key ones that pop up out on top. So with that, thank you all for participating with that polling. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Hita to help walk us through a discussion on the site's inventory.
Thank you, Kelly. We'd like to present now the general location, or actually specific location, of the sites that were selected, moving through sort of a methodology and process that was followed based on state regulations, state requirements, but also where those high resource areas are, and where housing would be very successful in the county. To kind of go over the considerations and approaches that we followed in doing this. First, we looked at the state legal requirements that are put out by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. There are certain legal requirements on what sites can be chosen and how those sites are selected. The state actually puts out guidance to provide a direction for jurisdictions on how to select. We also looked at the RHNA, or that Regional Needs Housing Assessment number, with the different distribution of the income categories to determine where affordable housing would be most appropriate, near amenities, services, jobs, what we've sort of outlined previously in this presentation. We also applied the buffer that is required by state law, and we went with a recommended buffer that exceeded 20% of the regional housing needs assessment number of the 3,300 units. We also looked at using sound planning practices when selecting sites. Again, looking at those high opportunity and resource locations for especially for lower income housing, very low and low income categories. We looked at fair housing considerations in terms of allocating sites throughout the county in those higher resource areas. We looked at sites that would be eligible for affordable housing funding through the state as well, making sure that there were incentives for developers to build because that funding might be available. We avoided locations with high fire risk or flood risk, also landslide risk. We also avoided conservation and scenic easements as well in environmentally sensitive areas. I wanted to say that once the draft housing element is available, which is later this summer, it will be available for 30 days for the public to review it before it is submitted to the state for their review. And next slide. So as I mentioned before, we had a higher than 20% buffer, which was our recommended buffer. The housing element will plan for 5,121 units in total at various income levels. And we wanted to, because the county is a big place, we wanted to summarize where these sites are located and how many units are basically allocated by different community planning area. So those are divided into the different categories you see here. The airport, General Monterey Peninsula, about 1,300 units. Bolsa Knolls, Greater Salinas, a little over 1,000 units. Fort Ord, close to 1,000 units. I won't go through every single one, but for fair housing considerations and affirmatively furthering fair housing, we really look to spread the locations of these housing sites throughout the county, paying close attention to location for amenities and resource areas, getting us to that 5,121 units. And next slide, please. So we wanted to walk you through by planning area, by community planning area, where these sites are located, so you could see exactly where this is. And next slide. So starting, and we're going to start with the airport Monterey Peninsula area. And you can see the photo here, the sites that are selected are in a dark blue shading. So you can see there are 3 sites, actually 4 sites, excuse me, in this area that is adjacent to the Monterey Regional Airport. There is a considerable amount of housing. You can see to the left of site number 2. You can see the subdivisions there. The majority of the housing on these sites is planned to be affordable, all but 140 units, and a total of 1,324 units on these 4 sites. And next slide, please. This is the Bolsa Knolls area. We have a total of 8 sites. So I wanted to bring your attention to the sites have numbers next to them. And they're not, I just wanted to clarify, there are not 12 sites shown on this slide. We numbered the sites 1 through the end of sort of our numbering. So the numbers here may not track with the number of sites that you see on the slide. I didn't want that to be confusing. So in this area, we plan for a total of 1,038 units. And here we have more above moderate than affordable, but there are close to 200 affordable units planned for these 8 sites. And this is adjacent to Salinas. Thanks, Kelly. Next slide. This is the Baranda area. There are 2 sites. You can see them in the upper portion of the photo. Here again, there are affordable units, 14 of them, but the majority are above moderate, total of 57 housing units on these 2 sites, and again, adjacent to the Salinas area. This is the Fort Ord area. There are 2 sites, very large sites, a total of 981 units. Here, we have a mix at different income levels. We have 745 above moderate, but we also have over 200 affordable units planned for this area, adjacent to East Garrison. This is the Aromas area. 1 site, very large site, 220 units, and this is 100% affordable at very low through moderate income at this location. This is Prunedale. There are 3 sites identified here. Again, 100% affordable at very low through moderate, a total of 247 housing units adjacent to El Camino Real. This is the Castroville area. There are 6 sites here. They are 100% affordable and specifically at very low and low incomes, a total of 332 units. This is the Carmel Valley area. We have 12 sites in this area, and it's really the majority of the units that are planned here are affordable. Out of 642 units planned, only 264 would be at above moderate, with the remainder being at affordable levels, and most notably 165 very low income units planned. This is the Carmel Valley area, 12 sites, 642 units. And again, we have the majority being affordable at very low through moderate, and 264 above moderate sites, units. And this is the Chular area, 5 sites in total, 203 housing units, the majority at above moderate, with also some very low and moderate income units planned. And this is Greenfield, 5 sites, 69 units, the majority at above moderate. However, we have about 21 affordable units, very low through moderate as well. So now we wanted to provide some examples of different housing types. You know, what would these housing units look like potentially, particularly when we talk about higher densities that maybe the county has experienced in some areas in the past. And so we have some examples of what these types of housing units could look like. So to the very left of the slide are single family cluster units. With these are single family detached units at 10 to 12 units per acre with front facing walkable streets. They could be 1 or 2 stories and either private patios or very small yards. The second housing type is townhomes or row houses, typically 12 to 18 units per acre. These are single family, but they are attached. Again, front facing with walkable streets, small private patios, and limited curb cuts. And then to the very right of the slide, cluster and manor homes, 15 to 22 dwelling units per acre. These are smaller multifamily buildings, sometimes clustered around courtyards, again, front facing walkable streets. And these would be 2 to 3 story housing products. And then getting into some increased densities, garden apartments at 19 to 25 dwelling units or units per acre. These would be smaller buildings with 4 units per level. These are 2 to 3 stories generally with open air stairways and have surface parking in front and around the units. And then finally, village cluster or urban suburban homes at 26 to 40 units per acre. These would be multifamily, again, buildings, 3 to 4 stories tall, and with parking behind the structure or tucked under rear parking or on-street parking. And next slide. So we wanted to show you some real world examples of a couple of these housing types. This is a project called Rogie Commons. These are small lot, single family homes. So they are detached with their own smaller yards. And you can see a photo to the left of sort of an aerial view of that project. And to the right is sort of the forward facing to the street view of one of the homes there. In terms of garden style or village cluster, multifamily, that was on the second housing type slide. This is a photo of Manzanita Place to the left in the East Garrison area. And also Alfred Diaz Infante, or formerly East Garrison Apartments, that are currently under construction. So you can see what these things would look like in real world terms. So in terms of next steps in the housing element process, this was a lot of information that we provided for you this evening. But where do we go from here? We're asking for, as much public input as possible, and we're going to provide email addresses and contact information so that you can email the county with any questions or comments even after you provide input tonight. And we would ask that those comments and questions be provided by June 30th so that we can incorporate them into the draft housing element. Again, we anticipate that the draft housing element will be publicly available in late summer of this year. There will be a 30-day review period. And at that time, we invite the public to provide input on every aspect of the housing element, including the sites inventory and the location of the sites. We anticipate having an open house with the draft housing element to present to everyone in the late fall of this year.
Thanks, Hita. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melanie. And Melanie, feel free to jump in if you want to kick off a little more information with this, or I can go to the next slide.
No, I think I just wanted to reiterate. So on the next slide, we'll have emails. So please, if you have questions, comments beyond tonight, and we provide information on our webpage, please do get in touch with us by June 30th, so that can be incorporated. So our email is generalplanupdates@co.monterey.ca.us. And we'll have one of our colleagues right now drop that email into the chat, so you can just grab it out of there. If you have questions, you can also call our staff directly. Jamie, and her number is 831-796-6414, and that would be for English speakers. And then for English and Spanish speakers, you can call Edgar Sanchez directly at 831-738-7058. And then you can find updates on the webpage here, and we will likewise drop that into the chat so that you have access. On our webpage, we are updating the housing element plus 2 other elements, our safety element, and we are developing a new environmental justice element. So this will take you to a landing page, and then you can select the housing element page to get detailed information. And on that housing element webpage, you can find tonight's presentations. You can find a map app that allows you to look at more detail at the sites that we presented on, as well as a list of the sites that have been presented. And so you can access all that information, and you can also get our contact information there. So with that, I want to thank everyone and for coming, and we're going to open up. We're going to go through your questions. We're going to answer as many as we can tonight. And I want to take a minute just to see if anyone on our housing community development team. I see Craig, you came on camera, so I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to give any closing comments before we move into question and answers.
Well, thank you for putting me on the spot, Melanie. I was just being courteous and coming off on camera, I should say. So yeah, I'm really excited. Thanks for this great presentation, and I'm looking forward to the questions and comments.
Perfect. Thank you. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. All right. So with that, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and remove the presentation, or stop showing the presentation. And what we will do now, so we're going to start with questions that we received through the Q&A, and as many as we can get in the chat. And we'll answer those, and then we will open it up to additional questions for folks who want to raise your hand. And we'll just keep going through as many questions as we can to get you all as much information as we can. So with that, let me, if you'll all bear with me, I'm going to go to the Q&A. So some of our questions are in Spanish. I'm going to do my best to make sure that I understand the question, and I'll answer in English. And then I will ask for our fully bilingual, our interpreter, to please help ensure that I've interpreted the question correctly and to make sure that those questions as well are translated. So going to the Q&A, I'm going to start with the questions that have come in that we were able to answer, and then I'll move to the questions that we weren't able yet to do written answers to. Okay, so the first question is, will the PowerPoint slides be shared? Yes, and that web page, they're already on the web page, and we dropped that web page into the chat and it was up on screen for you. When will a working draft of the housing element update be available? So we anticipate that that draft housing element will be available for public review in the late summer. So so that is the time frame, and we ask for anyone who wants, if you are not getting emails alerting you to these meetings, you can send an email to our email address that I provided, the general plan updates at co.monterey.ca.us, or you can drop your contact information in here today. You can individually chat the hosts, I believe, and you can share that information as well to ask to be added to that distribution list so you continue to get notices going forward. Great question. How can the county get more renters to come to these meetings? Renter feedback seems imperative. We agree. I noticed that as well. There actually is an unincorporated county. There is a high level of ownership. I believe approximately 70% of in the unincorporated area are homeowners, and approximately 30% renters. We are open to ideas. In addition to this format of a broad community meeting, we also are working through our community-based organizations, as well as our staff, trying to really get on the ground and push this information out to our communities. So we're very open to ideas that others may have to help us tap into our renters in particular. And again, the Spanish presentation is also available there on our webpage, and we did drop a link. We'll drop a quick link in there now. Okay, so we got a comment. Good to hear that county recognizes locating more housing, particularly for low and moderate income people in high resources area. And just agreement, the need to engage more renters in these meetings, and to have that apartment rental opportunities overall. So thank you for your comment. I will note to everybody, I'm actually not going to read all the comments we get. We're going to capture the chat and the Q&A. So we are receiving all of your comments, and we will definitely take those into consideration. And then for folks, we apologize for some of the polling questions that didn't have other as an option, and we saw a number of you drop that information and your additional thoughts. So again, please drop additional thoughts and comments, send us an email, drop it in chat. Okay, so why does the RHNA, so that's the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Number, why does that buffer only increase the units for the low, very low, and moderate income by about 200 units above the requirement, but our above moderate units have a significantly larger increase in that buffer? So the purpose for that, the generous buffer for the above moderate income units, is built into the housing element to offset the cost for producing adequate housing at the very low and low income levels. So we really need those market rate units to help offset some of those costs, and that thereby can demonstrate a feasibility and flexibility for developers to propose projects that include these lower affordability levels. So respectively, we did include buffers in the lower 3 affordability levels, also to help counteract the potential that the California Department of Housing and Community Development might reject some of our proposed sites when we submit our public draft. So how will low and very low units be reserved for rentals to those who need it? So there is a process for any of the typically very low and low income units are only affordable rental units, because that's how the financing works out here. They're not ownership units. And there is an application process and criteria that need to be met in order for potential renters to make an application to be eligible to rent those affordability units. And those are managed by the individual nonprofit developers or others who actually own and manage those rental apartment buildings. There was a question if there's a plan for the city of Seaside. And yes, there is a plan being developed, I believe, for the city of Seaside. However, we are from the County of Monterey, and so our jurisdiction, our authority of our plan is only in the unincorporated areas, so outside of the city limits. You would need to reach out directly to the city of Seaside to get a status on their housing element planning. There were some questions about getting assistance for housing. And challenges being able to being in the share center and having hotel vouchers, but not being able to get additional assistance. What we can, one, acknowledge how hard it is, and we recognize that we do not have sufficient housing at all of the income levels needed for our community, and that poses challenges such as what you're raising. This plan is at a high level our opportunity to plan and help facilitate more housing to be built. And then of course, in the short term, if anyone on this call does need additional short-term assistance, please feel free to share your contact information with us, with our team, and we will pass it along to our colleagues who work with those immediate support services and housing support services. Thank you. I'm going to come back to this question because I want to make, I think it's similar to the one we just had. And then there's a question to please clarify what we're referring to when we talk about, I think when we talk about accessible, affordable, low, very low, and moderate. So these are, so when we talk about our affordable housing, we're talking about housing that is affordable at individuals in our community at a certain income level. And those income levels relate to the median or the typical income level in the county. So very low is for individuals who fall below the household income of these households is below 50% of the county median income. And then those very low affordable units are set at a rent that is lower and within the affordability range of that very low. And then similar low income is, I don't want to misquote, but is the next up range. And so it's the range of income of a household, and then the pricing that that those units would be priced at to be able to be within those affordability levels. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit of that jargon or that language that we use. Okay, and then there's a question in the Bolsa Knolls area wanting to see if you're understanding correctly that we're going to have 57 units for those for low, very low units. I am going to actually ask Hita or someone who has the slides at the ready if you could just confirm if that is what the number indicated. Yes, at that very low income level, 57, and then at the low income level, another 57.
Melanie, would you like to share, should we share the slide that shows the income ranges?
Yeah, that might be helpful. Let's reshare that. And if we can say what slide number that is, so folks who have who have access to the Spanish language, this is slide number 14. And that shows what those income levels that the household needs to be able to then qualify for those different very low, low, and moderate income units. Oh, and then there's a question of how can you provide a recommendation for the site's inventory? So again, please send us, if you have immediate thoughts, you can drop them in the chat. If you have immediate questions today, put the Q&A. Also, you can send us an email after and just get back to us by January 30th with regards to your feedback for the site's inventory that we shared today. Okay, I think I got through all of the answered ones. So now I'm going to move to those that are open that we didn't have a chance to type an answer in, and I'll do my best. So we have a question: does the housing element and eventual plan for Monterey County contemplate or consider the impact of short-term rental on the availability of rental units for long-term renters? And that many of the previously long-term rental units in unincorporated Carmel Valley have been transitioned to short-term rental units, thereby removing those housing units from the housing stock available for long-term rental. So the housing element will acknowledge that short-term rental does happen, and we have a large number of short-term rentals here in the county. However, there's no formal way for us to monitor and report those direct impacts to housing and report that to the state. That's just not something that at the time that currently the state looks at. So we want to acknowledge this and include it in our housing element. What I did want to let folks know is that separately, we are actually developing our regulations for vacation or short-term rentals of residential properties. And through that vacation rental effort, we are actually doing an environmental analysis, which will look and will try to get at some of the housing impacts, those housing impacts resulting from vacation rentals. We will drop in, for those interested specifically in the vacation rental issues, we'll drop that web page in, if someone on our team could do that. So you could go to that web page and get information and make sure you're on that mailing list as well, so you can follow. So we'll have some information, but and it will be a mention in our housing element. Next question: why did you avoid areas with high wildfire risk? It is possible to reduce wildfire risk by thinning vegetation to be more safe at natural levels, and our own county regulations allow some of that work to take place. So we do want to acknowledge a lot of the county is in high fire risk zones. And so our housing element is not saying that no housing can be built in those areas, but it is a part of the state's criteria that we avoid, to the extent feasible, high fire risk areas, along with other high hazard areas in the county. So that was the approach that we took and incorporated in the housing element. In addition, for our affordable housing, the very low and low income, in order to be eligible, in particular for those for funding sources, you also those need to be sited outside of high hazard areas. I'm going to pause right now and just see, Hita, did I get that correct, or is there any further clarification that we should provide?
No, I think that was a good answer. The only clarification I would add is that we avoided severe high fire areas. So it wasn't just high fire, it was severe high fire areas.
Thank you. So we got a question asking what percentage of these units will be accessible for people with disabilities. That's a great question. At the housing element plan level, we plan for housing based on income levels, not for the specific resident or community groups that may be served by those housing developments. So that being said, our housing element can recommend and both policies and programs to help support and encourage that units be included for accessibility for people with disabilities. And so we would expect that there would be some policy and programs around that, but it really comes down to when the individual housing projects are being proposed, that's the point in time where it's determined exactly what community members would be served by those projects. And the county does not build housing. So we develop a plan. We try to remove as many barriers and help facilitate where we can, but ultimately we do not build the housing. Housing's built dependent on private developers as well as nonprofit developers and partners. The county does have some funding to help support housing development, but again, we don't build that directly. Next question. How do these sites relate to municipal jurisdiction plans? So for example, our greenfield sites that are adjacent to the city, does that get integrated into the city's plans? So for all of the sites that we located near or adjacent to cities, we were mindful that they were within the city's future plan area, as well as consistent where we have negotiated agreements between the county and the cities to ensure that there was consistency there. The way that the housing element is set up, anything that is within the unincorporated area currently counts towards the county's RHNA count. So that's why those sites are included. Okay, so then there's a question, why are we limiting housing to what is essentially apartments? Monterey County's cities make up less than 2% of the county's 2.4 million acre land area. Why not allow more housing in the county, within the county jurisdiction? So I want to be clear, this housing element and the housing element plans and sites inventory actually assumes a very diverse range of housing, not just apartments. We are looking in some areas to be able to facilitate a little higher density housing. Some apartments would be a part of that, but not exclusive. And so in the presentation, when Hito walked through what the densities mean and what those might look like, we anticipate and plan for a diverse mix of housing types. And even if an entire site has an average of total density, we would have a diversity of different types of housing within that. We do need to balance in the unincorporated area, even though we have a lot of acreage. We have a lot of infrastructure challenges in unincorporated county. We have a very, very rich and important agricultural community and ag land that we need to be protective of. And so those were other considerations that did come into consideration for the unincorporated areas in developing our sites inventory. Did Monterey County unincorporated meet its 5th cycle RHNA numbers? We did meet our RHNA numbers for the 5th cycle, so the cycle we're in currently, for the low income category. And that was achieved largely through a number of the farm worker housing developments that we've seen go in the last number of years. And then in our above moderate categories, we did not achieve our RHNA numbers for the very low nor the moderate income categories. I am gonna ask for help translating the question from Beatrice Ramirez that was left at 7:25 p.m. Edgar, I'm not sure if you could read that in English for me. That one I'm not quite clear on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How would I know the steps and requirements for a renter? Apartment. Okay. I see that there is more housing for people that earn more money. I believe the necessity is for very low or low income.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for that question. And thank you, Edgar, for helping me out there.
Yeah.
So you're right. So we actually, the state increased our requirement for affordable housing, which includes the very low and the low income. And they actually reduced the required percentage of above moderate income, recognizing that we need more of those affordability levels. And then for any individual, whether you qualify or how to qualify, That is based on, there's a set criterion. And again, we can, if you're looking in the immediate of trying to get on those lists for determining if you're eligible and getting on those lists for potential housing units, please let us know and provide us your contact information, and we will get our colleagues who work with those affordable housing developments in touch with you to get you into that process. We have a question: can water availability be ignored? No. So that's really one of the really critical pieces is we have to be balanced in where and how we put housing. And we cannot simply say that, wow, we've got lack of water or we have challenges to water. Of course, you know, we know that there's cease and desist order for Cal-Am with the Carmel River pumping. There are a lot of issues related throughout the county with water, but no, we can't simply ignore it, nor can we avoid it. So what we will need to do is, and we've had a lot of conversations internally of how we might do this, and we're open to ideas as well. We'll need to have programs and policies for how we can help push that needle to help provide for water and not have water be a barrier to housing. So when locating these sites, was there consideration of environmental harms to low income sites? So I think I understand that to be, were we mindful not to put low income sites in areas where there's already high risk of other environmental pollutants or other harms that, and what I will say is that's actually a very, very important part of our housing element, is to make sure that we are not concentrating our lower income housing in areas within the county that are already low income, that are already have compounded environmental concerns. And so that is a really important part of the balance of our housing element, to make sure that we are citing, meeting that affirmatively furthering fair housing, and citing the both citing our affordable housing, our lower income sites in areas that help get more of those in high resource or more expensive areas where our jobs are, and then also creating in our communities that are lower income, that do have more basically less investment over time, to actually try to create opportunities to create more diverse housing and improve the infrastructure in those, to help undo some of these environmental burdens of some of our lower income and disadvantaged communities. So for those, the next question is, for those sites currently listed throughout Monterey County, are they owned by the county or private property owners? So the majority of the sites and the majority of the property within unincorporated Monterey County is privately owned. And so the majority of these sites are owned by private individuals. This is a high-level planning document. We are reaching out to notify property owners that have been included in the housing element, to notify them that they have been identified as a potential opportunity site. But at this high planning level, we don't, for example, discuss with every property owner opportunities. This is a high-level planning document. The County of Monterey does own property. Most of the property that we own that is really eligible and desirable for housing is within other jurisdictions. So for example, we own property within the city of Salinas that we, the county, are currently working with the city, and we have a nonprofit developer to develop those sites within the city. However, county property that's owned within a city jurisdiction is not allowed to be included as a part of our housing element. So those are not included. All right, next question. Can transient occupancy tax funds gathered through short-term rentals be dedicated to help fund affordable housing through the RHNA? So currently, transient occupancy tax is collected and it goes into the county's discretionary general fund. And then those budgetary decisions are made at the Board of Supervisors level for how those funds are utilized. There's nothing that would prevent that conversation and potentially looking at those funds to be utilized for affordable housing. There are potentially other types of programs as well that can help generate funding. And again, these are some of the policies that we love to hear and we can look to including in the planning into our housing element document. Okay, so the next one, most of Monterey County is rated at very high fire hazard severity by CAL FIRE. However, this is largely based upon hazardous accumulation of fuels over hundreds of years, a policy to suppress wildfire. However, Monterey County's policies act to hinder and block people from being able to reduce accumulation of wildfire fuels to safe levels. And we can see these those fire severity zone maps. So I want to thank you for that feedback. There are different policies that we address and that we can look at in terms of fire management and fire regulations. We are also, I did want to flag, we are also updating our safety element as a part of, it's moving on a different timeline, but as a part of our housing element update, we are also updating our safety element. And so those questions and comments about fire hazard and policies and that we can address there, we will relay to our safety element team. And I encourage you to also follow our safety element development. Okay, next comment. Are you aware of almost no accessory dwelling units in Carmel Valley and the county environmental making it extremely difficult to have one? Oh, okay, sorry. So the statement is if we are aware that there are almost no accessory dwelling units in Carmel Valley and that county environmental regulations are making it extremely difficult to get accessory dwelling units. So we do know in unincorporated county, especially in areas that are not directly, do not have sewer and public water, that it is more challenging to get an accessory dwelling unit. And we will be looking at, as a part of our housing element, ways in which we can help streamline and help facilitate accessory dwelling units in unincorporated county. So we are aware of that. And again, we're open to hearing from folks what difficulties are encountered to help generate those policies or programs to help make it easier to get those ADUs in those appropriate locations. There is a comment that just says, i.e. airports and freeways. So I think somebody's comment got a little bit cut off. And so if that was your comment, hopefully you can re-enter your question if it's still a question that you have. We have another comment about wildfire, and I'm going to receive it as a comment. Thank you. And again, we will relay those comments over and questions to our safety element folks to take into consideration. All right, so that gets us through all the question and answers in our Q&A. I'm going to take a breath. I know it's a lot, and I thank everyone. These are great questions, and I really want to get through all of them. So we're going to kind of keep going here. So I'm going to go over to our chat now. And so bear with me. Our chat is a little bit harder to track. So I'm going to go through our chat now. And I'm going to catch any questions that came through the chat that we didn't get through the Q&A. Okay.
While you're looking, Melanie, we did get one more question.
Oh, in the Q&A?
In the Q&A. It's does the RENA address the possibility of repurposing existing commercial property, i.e. office or retail locations, into affordable housing in already developed areas? I read the question. Do you want to give the answer?
I will keep rolling with it. Correct me if I'm wrong. So our housing element, does look at redevelopment of already existing commercial properties or underutilized or already developed. The challenge that we had with our sites inventory is that there is a very high threshold that needs to be met in order to specifically include already developed sites as one of your identified opportunity housing sites in the housing element. So where you may see a lack of those redevelopment properties identified in our sites inventory, that's largely because of the challenge and the criteria that need to be met for the state to accept those sites as eligible for redevelopment. That being said, we really look to have policies and programs in our housing element to help encourage that type of reuse of underutilized commercial areas or already developed properties. And then thank you for the clarification that that airports and freeway comment was related to the exposure to environmental harms of low-income individuals. Yes, so thank you for that. That was included in my response to the question. All right, so. Okay, so we have a number of comments that we received during our polling that are comments, not questions. So I want to acknowledge those of you who dropped your comments into the chat. We received those. We will take those. I'm going to skip over those because they're not questions to be answered, but we do hear them and we'll take that as important feedback. We answered the question about moderate and affordable units.
I'm seeing a question about whether the housing element update also includes updating of master plans for different areas.
Thank you.
Area plans, master plans.
That's a good question. What the housing element will not directly be updating the master plans and general plans. What the housing element may do is identify the needs to update, to possibly amend the general plan, certain policies, and it may identify policies that may need to be amended in those other master community plans. And then our subsequent implementation actions would be to actually make those subsequent amendments. Okay, so we did have a question about how come we aren't having more housing constructed in Marina and Seaside. So again, those are separate jurisdictions, the city of Seaside, city of Marina. And so the housing development that is or is not happening within those cities is really a question to pose to those cities. We only look at the unincorporated area. Okay, so another question, can shared housing, not short-term rentals, be included in the housing element as affordable housing? So looking at ways to leverage existing housing stock to create affordable housing without delays and expense of building. So I would interpret that in terms of shared housing. So if there's an existing residential unit and you choose to do shared housing with other individuals, et cetera, that would be a use that's within that existing housing, and that wouldn't be a new housing unit that would count towards our RHNA, but definitely that is strongly encouraged. That being said, looking at opportunities to potential, if there's a way to take existing housing, for example, and create junior accessory dwelling units or accessory dwelling units, possibly taking large homes and converting them into two separate homes to create more units. Those units could count. To be counted towards our affordable unit levels, those actually require certain deed restrictions and or evidence that those occupants do meet those standards and criteria for low income. So those are definitely creative ways to help meet our needs and important. But to formally be counted as RHNA, there are some kind of additional formalities that would be needed. Okay, so I then see a question. How do events like what happened in the city of Seaside last year and what happened yesterday in Salinas with Monterey County Sheriff's deputies inform the messaging of the county housing element, or should it be considered as an isolated incident that prevents connecting violent crimes to the local housing crisis? So I actually need to acknowledge that I did not hear the news, and so I'm not clear on exactly, I'm wondering if it was a domestic housing incident. And so I am at a little bit of a loss of how to respond to that question. Does anybody on our team have a little more context for that question and to possibly be able to answer that?
Just on the shared housing question, Melanie?
Please.
Yeah, so the way that the law is written and the guidances from the state of California, new housing units are counted, and the way that that's described in the law and in HCD guidance, state HCD, is the construction of a new unit or the creation of a new unit, as opposed to existing housing stock. So for example, an accessory dwelling unit would be counted as a new unit. I am aware of shared housing programs, and there are other jurisdictions in California that use them, and they're very, very helpful. And they've been successful at placing people into housing, into a mutual beneficial situation. The state seems to be focused on creating new units, as opposed to better utilizing existing units, based on my reading of the law and the guidance. So isn't to say that that's not a valuable program. It can be. But I don't believe that it would count as a unit towards the RENA in reporting documentation. So it's still good. It's just not the creation of a new unit. It's better utilizing our existing stock to the point of Doris.
So, and again, that's actually a great suggestion and idea for programs that we can include that are not directly related to our sites that we've identified, but just general programs that can help improve overall housing in the county. All right, we've got a couple more written questions. So I am going to, so I see there's a question about how much is it going to cost for all of this housing in total? And then Edgar, it looks like you typed in Spanish some response to that question. So I'm going to go ahead and respond. Tell me again, others chime in. So the construction of housing is really based on the market, the land base, the cost of construction materials, the contractors, and it's really a part of the private development or the nonprofit development that takes place. So our housing element doesn't necessarily look at all of this housing and try to identify what it would cost to build it. Again, this is a planning document where we do try to understand the market conditions that do make it costly to build housing, and we will have policies and programs to help remove barriers to help reduce the cost of construction, but it doesn't, so that's to help facilitate construction, but not necessarily look at that total cost. Okay, those are all the questions that I'm seeing typed in, written in. We are a few minutes before 8. And so I wanna
And
offer,
Melanie, actually, there are
yes,
2 additional questions that popped up into the Q&A. The first one from Danielle.
Perfect. Thank
in
you.
regards to, sure, I'll let you go ahead and read it.
Perfect. It takes a team. And also folks who have lingering questions, you can also raise your hand at this point and we can continue to answer questions for a little bit longer here. All right. So could it be considered that non-owner occupied vacation or short-term rentals in Monterey County be required to have 1 room or an accessory dwelling unit for an on-site property manager? likely that wouldn't use more water since those vacation rentals are rented most of the days of the year. So that's a good suggestion. I'm not seeing that. That is, I think, more of a suggestion related to our vacation rental ordinance, but I do see how it is connected to the housing element. So we'll take that as a comment for input, and thank you for that. And then the next question, if I'm understanding correctly, the county has more than the required amount of units in their RENA numbers right now to account for the state potentially rejecting some of the sites. So if by chance the state approves all of the sites that are proposed, does that mean that the county will hold themselves to a higher number of units? So by us planning for a buffer, we are not in any way contractually holding ourselves to a higher number of units. We're planning for a buffer with the hopes and the intention that with that buffer, we will successfully meet our RENA allocation. And so by including that buffer, we're not obligating us to more, we are actually trying to create the circumstances to help guarantee that we meet or come closer to meeting our RENA obligation. And I'll pause there again if anyone on our team wants to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we got more housing than we were required to build, it wouldn't be bad. So I think at a higher level, what we're doing is identifying sites that we think could accommodate higher densities of housing in hopes that those sites can have a mix of units, including lower income units. We still have the ability to construct units in other places of the county at the zoning and densities that are in place at the moment with all the barriers that are there, although we do have some more work to do to identify what those barriers are, and there will be some implementation to remove some of those barriers through zoning amendments and impact fee changes and things of that sort.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, I see one hand raised, and it looks like we're right at 8 o'clock, so we'll get one last question in. Jane Parker, I'm going to give you the opportunity. It'll ask you to unmute now.
Thank you. And I'd be happy to turn on my video, but I guess I'm not allowed to. I want to thank you for this presentation. I really was impressed with some of the interesting and variety of sites that you found in the various parts of the county. And I was glad to see that some of them are being, you're proposing to add units to already built up environments. And I wondered if you were, so a question is, are you prioritizing kind of disturbed areas? Because another bunch of the proposed sites look like, when I zoom in on the map, it looks like they're open space. And some of those open spaces are not particularly close to schools or grocery stores or very many jobs. And so that's a question you can answer later. The other thing I appreciated was in the lower income communities that you were focusing on putting moderate and above moderate housing. And I was wondering why Castroville was not one of those places. Castroville has a lot of affordable housing, as I understand it, and might be a community that could use some moderate and above moderate. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I appreciate the look at the mouth of the valley. And again, it looks like it may be mostly open space that's being contemplated there next to the shopping centers. And I know it's very difficult to incentivize, existing retail commercial folks to change what they're doing. But I hope that you will include in the housing element incentives on zoning for upzoning those areas in case there's, that becomes possible in the future. So thank you for allowing me to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And just briefly, the sites that we came to, they're really, we really tried to, there are a lot of state requirements, local planning and policy priorities, and other opportunities and limitations that kind of all came into play for where we identified sites. I really want to encourage folks on this call, if you know individuals who are actually interested in doing, say, redevelopment of property, or they actually have interest in developing their property, be great. Now's the time to come forward. We can include sites where, and again, our formal sites, as you indicated, those have certain thresholds and criteria they need to meet. We will have other policies to help streamline, for example, policies to make it easier to upzone and hopefully redevelopment in existing commercial areas, for example. So we really encourage as well, if there are developers that have interest or property owners that have interest and want to come forward and say, I actually want my site to be a potential and included, we're happy to add those in. And thank you for your other thoughts and comment. We'll take those as well forward. Okay, we had a couple more. All right, so I just was checking the chat. So we are 4 minutes past 8 o'clock. I want to respect everybody's time. We know this is a lot of information, and we know that there I'm sure are more questions. So we really just want to remind everybody, maybe Kelly, if we can just, before everyone jumps off, let's share the email and the email and the webpage again. Please, by June 30th, send us any further questions, comments, suggestions that you have in response to the information you heard today, in response to the sites inventory that's available also on our webpage along with this presentation. And with that, I will just really thank you all for your time. Thank you for helping to get this information out to your neighbors and your